Afrika iko tayari kuweza kujadili masuala yake na kupata suluhu ya masuala mbalimbali ambayo yamekuwa yakiathiri bara hili la Afrika. Ukumbi huu wa Savo, mtazamaji, Salva Kiir kama unavyomwona ameweza kuwasili, ambaye ni rais wa Sudan Kusini. Hali ndo kama hiyo, mtazamaji, hapa katika ukumbi wa Savo. Marais kutoka mataifa mbalimbali ya bara Afrika wameweza kuwasili. Katibu mkuu wa Umoja wa Mataifa Antonio Guterres ameweza kuwasili. Mwenyekiti wa Umoja wa Afrika Musa Faki ameweza kuwasili. Tunaona vile vile viongozi wa Kenya. Tunaona mama wa taifa Rachel Ruto na mwenzake hapo kando wa naibu wa rais, mke wa naibu wa rais Dorcas Gachagua. Basi mtazamaji, kongamano hili linaanza spesheli kwa sasa. Tuweze
distinguished guests. To start us off this morning, we have a Kikwetu production, a fusion of Samburu, Turkana, Borana, and Maasai communities performing with contemporary dancers and acrobats, giving you a taste of the diverse and rich Kenyan culture. Sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Climate Summit from the 4th to the 6th September 2023. See you all in Nairobi.
Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, good morning and welcome to the Africa Climate Summit. We heard from His Excellency President Ruto yesterday, where he so eloquently presented Africa's case for fairness, justice, and equity in helping the continent pursue its climate action efforts. If I may, I would like to emphasize His Excellency's points, which simply is this: Africa needs reform of the global financial fund its climate financement. Business as usual will not cut it. I'll reiterate that. His Excellency's points was this: Africa needs reform of the global financial architecture to fund its climate action goals. Business as usual is not going to cut it. In fact, to continue as we are will only serve to prove the truth of Albert Einstein's definition of insanity. And I quote, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results." We need to do something different.
We absolutely do. Thank you so much for that, Zain. And this is powerful. Africa called and the world has come. His Excellency, you called and Africa is setting an agenda. And I want us to give the leadership, the people, all the different organizations in this room a round of applause for coming together to do this. This is a moment. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday some powerful themes came through. Two quotes in particular from the young delegates stayed with me. They said, "Our countries will be burning and drowning, and you will not be there to save us." You know, it occurred to me that countries are drowning and burning today. So if we don't do something now, what will our children and generations to come experience? The other thing they said was, we have to trust you, and you must trust us. And I thought such wisdom, grace, hope, and responsibility captured in one simple statement. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we must call to the world from Nairobi today and make it clear that it is past time to address the tough issues. It is past time to hold the difficult but much needed conversations on Africa, risk, perception, reality, resources, policies, regulations, systems. And it's past time for these conversations to be guided by equity. That is what we need.
And Africa has the resources and assets, including mineral and energy resources, agricultural capacity, and natural capital to promote the global decarbonization agenda. But to realize this potential, the world needs to do its own part in helping steer Africa on the pathway to an inclusive, sustainable, and progressive future. At the fundamental level, that will require decoupling economic growth from environmental degradation. In the words of the late Wangari Maathai, an icon of Kenya and a Nobel Peace Laureate, and I quote, "We are very fond of blaming the poor for destroying the environment, but often it is the powerful, including governments, that are responsible," end quote. In other words, we are all in this together. It will require our combined efforts to overcome this challenge. The spirit of Harambe
as we say in Kiswahili.
And that means for those of you who don't know, let's all pull together, let's work together for a common goal and purpose. Zain, thank you for reminding us. We have icons, we have role models all over the continent doing incredible things. Thank you so much. We also have a young, innovative workforce. There's so much potential. So our call is, let's pull together. Thank you for coming. Thank you for ensuring you listen and are present and will act around a climate agenda determined by the African continent. An agenda that is going to safeguard our people, our communities, livelihoods on the continent, our economies, and ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, when we safeguard Africa, we safeguard the world. Can we give that a round of applause, please? Please. Safeguarding Africa is safeguarding the world.
Now, to help guide us on this journey with an incredible lineup of speakers, please give a very warm welcome to the Honorable Soipan Tuya, Cabinet Secretary, Environment, Climate Change and Forestry for the Government of Kenya. Mheshimiwa.
Thank you.
Excellency, President William Ruto, our host president, all our visiting heads of state here with us today, all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. History documents that Africa, and Kenya in particular, is the cradle of mankind. It is my hope and prayer that out of the cradle of mankind comes the all-time elusive solution to combating climate change. African-led solutions to decarbonize and steer a low-carbon development pathway for the globe. We are gathered here today to make history as the continent of Africa. The world is facing many challenges, but none has become so apparent, so threatening, and so devastating as the threat of climate change. And we can only respond by making history at this inaugural Africa Climate Summit. Everywhere we look in Africa, there is a climate change related story to tell. For example, in Malawi, Hurricane Freddy led to the loss of 200 people and nearly $2 billion US dollars worth of damage occasioned. Last year, the Horn of Africa came out of one of the worst droughts in decades, where we lost hundreds of lives and thousands of livestock. In fact, for the first time in Kenya, we had to track water for our wildlife in the national parks and reserves. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, although African countries are making every available effort to deal with the vagaries of climate change, our economies are continuing to be weighed down by mounting debts. As we speak, 31 out of the 37 heavily indebted poor countries in the world are in Africa. Over 20 years of climate change negotiations have yielded agreements and promises that have delivered very little for Africa. Instead, the imagery of Africa as a poor continent, a victim, keep dominating the climate negotiations year in, year out. The fact that Africa has historically contributed very little to the global emissions has remained an inconvenient truth, yet receiving no reciprocity from the rest of the world for the contribution we make. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this inaugural Africa Climate Summit presents an opportunity like no other for Africa to change the course of history. Millions of young Africans are looking up to African leaders here to leave them with a promise, a visible promise, to make them feel that there is a future where they have hope to get green jobs, live a dignified life, and thrive. We are looking to the summit to chart a green growth pathway for the African continent, set the stage for Africa to lead the globe towards a more ecologically responsible global industrialization, catalyzed by financing that is accessible, adequate, and affordable. The world is waiting for something anew out of this week. We must not be held hostage to the past, but allow ourselves to reimagine a future where, as Africa, we lift ourselves from the fatigue of despair and make history. Excellencies, I am persuaded that the time is now, and I beseech us to respond to this historical call by proposing radical solutions to the world that will help us deal with the climate change. I invite us to listen to the inner urge calling us to serve humanity, that we go down in history, that it is out of Africa, the cradle of mankind, that the solution for climate change came forth. Excellencies, allow me now to invite, to kick us off, the President of the African Development Bank, who has been in the middle of this discourse and supporting a lot of support to the cause. Welcome, Dr. Adesina Akiwumi.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Your Excellency, William Ruto, President of Kenya, and our gracious host, and my dear brother. Your Excellency, Asali Assoumani, President of Comoros and Chairperson of the African Union. Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellencies, the First Ladies, Your Excellency Moussa Faki, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. We are also joined today by Your Excellency Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Your Excellency Mustafa Madhoudi, Prime Minister of Egypt, Your Excellency Sultan Al-Jaber, COP28 President-designate, honorable ministers, ambassadors, heads of diplomatic missions, the amazing youth and women of Africa. Single ladies and gentlemen, good morning, everyone. Habari sa asubuhi. I think I got it right somehow. I wish to commend you, Your Excellency President Ruto, for your excellent leadership in convening this Africa Climate Summit, and for your dynamic and passionate leadership in spearheading Africa's first climate summit. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for hosting us all in this beautiful nature-blessed country of Kenya. The African Development Bank is pleased to be a major sponsor of the Africa Climate Summit. The presence in such large numbers of Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, ministers and development partners from around the world says it all. Africa's voice on climate change will resonate across the world. The Africa Climate Summit will shape the future pathway of Africa's development. We gather because the people of Africa expect us to act. We gather because the future of the youth of Africa is at stake. We gather because we must galvanize global actions on climate. We gather because our collective existence is at risk. Climate change is short-changing Africa. Droughts and floods have been increasing across the continent. No country is spared. As we gather today, if we strain our ears enough, we will hear the calls of urgency from farmers whose crops and livestock are being destroyed, the voices of fishing folks whose catch is reducing and livelihoods are being imperiled, the voices of the young whose future is being compromised, the voices of women and children who bear the brunt of climate change, the voices of economies unable to cope with the ever-rising costs of climate-induced risks. We have a duty and responsibility to hear these voices and to act with a greater sense of urgency. And responding requires action at three levels. At the global level, the developed economies must meet their commitment to provide $100 billion annually in climate finance. The global climate financial architecture must be changed to prioritize the needs of Africa. At the national level, we must accelerate actions on climate adaptation. And that is why the African Development Bank has committed to providing $25 billion towards climate finance by 2025. We have also launched the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, together with the Global Center on Adaptation, the largest climate adaptation program in the world. Africa must develop with what it has, not what it does not have. Africa is blessed with large sources of renewable energy in the world. Renewables from solar, hydro, wind, and geothermal. But we cannot power Africa with potential. We must fully unlock Africa's renewable energy potential. That's why the African Development Bank is implementing $20 billion Desert to Power program to harness the power of solar and deliver electricity for 250 million people. We must power every home, every school, every hospital, and provide stable, affordable, and reliable power. But we must, Your Excellencies, be pragmatic. Africa must use its natural gas and combine it with renewable resources. The International Energy Agency's analysis shows that doing so would only add 0.5% to global emissions. Give us space to grow. We must ensure that Africa's food and agricultural systems are climate resilient. The African Development Bank's flagship program, Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, has provided 12 million farmers in 21 countries with climate resilient agricultural technologies. In Ethiopia, climate resilient wheat varieties supported by the bank has helped it to become self-sufficient in wheat in just 3 years. We are acting at scale to feed Africa with climate resilience. Under the leadership of President Macky Sall, as the then chairperson of the African Union, and the strong leadership of you, our heads of state and government, we succeeded with the Feed Africa Summit held in Dakar in January. We developed food and agriculture delivery compacts for African countries. We have mobilized, Your Excellency Presidents, heads of state and government globally, $72 billion to support African countries to implement these food and agricultural delivery compacts and to assure food security and food sovereignty within 5 years, and doing so with climate resilient agricultural systems. I wish to recognize all development partners from around the world and the African Union Commission who work so tirelessly with us to make this happen. Thank you very much. We will repeat this at the Africa Climate Summit with the development of climate change adaptation investment compacts to help channel financing to national climate adaptation action at scale. We must ensure that resources mobilized do not stay simply in government offices, but reach and protect the lives of people in our villages, in our towns, and in our cities. All lives must be protected from climate change. We must put the youth and women at the core of climate financing. That's why the African Development Bank and the Global Center on Adaptation are announcing here today the launch of a $1 billion facility for Youth Adapt program that will accelerate access to financing for the youth to tackle climate change. The youth are not just the future of Africa, the youth are the present of Africa. The African Development Bank is also rolling out the establishment of youth entrepreneurship investment banks, new financial institutions that will support and grow the businesses of the youth all across Africa. Finally, We must revalue, Your Excellencies, the wealth of Africa by accounting for the proper valuation of its abundant natural resources, including its vast forests that sequester carbon. Few may know that the Congo forest basin is the world's largest carbon lungs. Rich nature wealth, and the global value of its carbon it sequesters for the world enough. Its GDP must take that into consideration. Africa's GDP must therefore be the GDP ratio of several African countries much lower, and they will have greater headroom to borrow more financing to support their development, including investing in the greening of their economies. We must, Your Excellencies, therefore, turn Africa's economies green, not because others ask us to do so, but because it is in our interest to do so. Africa must develop its own carbon markets, properly price its carbon, and turn its vast carbon using for Africa. Together with partners from around the world, let's make it happen for Africa. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Gracias. Shukran. Asante. Sana.
Peacekeeping. You know you have.
Excellency Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, Excellency Azalia Soumani, President of the Union of the Comoros and current Chairman of the African Union, Excellencies, Head of State, Government and Delegation, Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Union, Commission, representatives of international organizations, finance, or